A homeless war veteran appears before a judge known for his harsh stance on vagrancy cases. But when the broken man reveals a weathered photograph, reality shatters in a devastating way. The vagrant being condemned is actually the judge's biological father, lost for decades after war trauma and systemic failures. Two lives cruelly separated by fate now face each other on opposite sides of a courtroom, where decades of pain, misunderstandings, and missed opportunities are about to collide in a revelation that will change not only their lives but the entire justice system. A powerful story about second chances, forgiveness, and how sometimes you have to lose everything to find what truly matters.
Hello, before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. At the end, please rate the story. I will be happy to respond to you in the comments. Now, let's get to the story.
The November morning sun filtered through the silk curtains of the mansion in Lincoln Park, bathing the master bedroom in a soft, golden light. The digital alarm clock read 5:45 a.m. when Judge Robert Mitchell opened his eyes, as he had for over 20 years without needing an alarm. At 45, Mitchell was a man of unbreakable habits, each morning movement orchestrated with the precision of a metronome. His bare feet touched the polished oak floor as he headed to the Italian marble bathroom. The mirror reflected an imposing man, perfectly groomed gray hair even after a night's sleep, a square jaw, and blue eyes that had delivered hundreds of sentences. Mitchell adjusted his navy blue silk tie, each move deliberate and measured. His wife, Margaret, still slept deeply in their king-size bed, wrapped in 400 thread-count Egyptian sheets, unaware of the morning routine that upheld the justice empire he had built in the gourmet kitchen. The Italian coffee machine had already brewed his double espresso. Set to be ready at exactly 6:15 a.m. Mitchell took the first sip, savoring the bitterness that fully woke him. Through the panoramic window, he gazed at the meticulously maintained garden, where each shrub was pruned with military precision, and every flower planted in perfect symmetry. It was November, and Chicago's chill had already stripped the trees of their golden leaves, leaving bare branches that stretched like skeletal fingers against the leaden sky. His thoughts turned to the day ahead. More vagrancy cases, more homeless individuals insisting on disturbing the order of his city. Mitchell felt no remorse for the firmness of his sentences. He firmly believed that misplaced compassion was the road to chaos. Chicago was a thriving city, and he saw himself as the guardian of that prosperity, protecting law-abiding citizens from those who chose to live on society's margins. 15 miles away, on the outskirts of the financial district, Thomas Anderson woke quite differently. The 32-degree Fahrenheit cold seeped through layers of newspapers and cardboard he used as blankets in the narrow alley between two commercial buildings. His muscles ached, not just from the cold, but from memories that haunted him every night. At 55, Tom carried on his body and soul the marks of two wars, the one he fought in Afghanistan, and the one he battled daily against his own demons. His worn olive-green military backpack, patched with duct tape, contained everything left of a once prosperous life. Inside, carefully folded, were a change of clothes, a yellowed photo of his family, some documents, and a medal of honor that no longer meant anything to a world that had forgotten him. Tom instinctively touched the backpack as he did every morning, a ritual to confirm his only belongings were still there. His fingers trembled, not just from cold but from the growing anxiety in his chest like a hungry beast. Last night's nightmares still echoed in his mind. The sound of distant explosions, cries of wounded comrades, the smell of gunpowder and blood that never seemed to leave his nostrils. Tom squeezed his eyes shut, trying to push the memories back into the dark place where he kept them during the day. His stomach had been growling so long that he barely felt real hunger anymore. It was more a hollow sensation, an emptiness that food alone couldn't fill. Tom slowly rose, his knees creaking in protest, and began folding the cardboard he had used as bedding. It was a survival ritual, to maintain appearances, avoid unnecessary attention. The sound of distant sirens blended with the morning Chicago traffic, a bustling urban symphony that had become the soundtrack of his new life. Tom remembered when those same sounds comforted him, when they meant he was home, safe, far from battlefields. Now, every siren was a reminder of his own fall, how he'd become just another problem for the city he once proudly served. The streets started filling with hurried people, executives in expensive suits carrying leather briefcases, students with colorful backpacks, all with clear destinations and organized lives. Tom watched them pass, ghosts of a life he once had, construction work, a small but cozy suburban home, plans for the future. All of it crumbled when PTSD became uncontrollable, when sleepless nights turned to days without work, when bills piled up into an insurmountable mountain. His steps took him automatically toward downtown, where he knew he could find a hot meal at a shelter, maybe even some temporary work. But Tom also knew he was walking on dangerous ground. The downtown streets were constantly patrolled, and his appearance drew attention. The stubble, the wrinkled clothes, the smell he couldn't wash away even when he used public restrooms. Then he heard footsteps behind him. Tom recognized that sound, the determined rhythm of police boots on asphalt. He didn't need to turn around to know what was happening. He'd been through this twice just this month. His heart raced, not out of fear of arrest itself, but because he knew who would be waiting for him in court. Judge Mitchell. The name alone was enough to make any homeless person in Chicago cringe with dread. Tom had heard the stories in shelters, whispered among survivors of his sentences. Impossible fines, humiliating community service, extended jail time for crimes barely worthy of the name. The handcuffs clicked around his wrists with a metallic sound that echoed in his soul. Tom didn't resist. He knew it would only make things worse. As he was led to the police cruiser, his eyes drifted to Chicago's gray sky, where heavy clouds gathered like a storm's promise. In a few hours, he would face the man who would decide his fate, unaware that their lives were about to intertwine in ways neither could imagine. The city kept its frantic pace around them, the judge finishing his morning espresso in his warm mansion, the veteran being driven away in a cold cruiser. Two men whose paths were destined to cross on that chilly November day, carrying with them the scars and contradictions of an America that seldom looks at its own open wounds. The Cook County District Court radiated the solemnity that Judge Mitchell had always considered essential for the administration of justice. The dark wood-paneled walls absorbed the nervous whispers of the audience in the gallery, while the cold fluorescent lights cast austere shadows that seemed to judge everyone even before the session began. The air was thick with palpable tension, a mix of cheap deodorant, expensive perfume, and the indescribable scent of fear radiating from those awaiting their sentences. Mitchell adjusted his black robe with a precise and familiar motion, his fingers sliding over the fabric like a pianist caressing the keys before a performance. Taking his seat on the leather chair behind the elevated bench, his blue eyes scanned the room with the authority of someone who had presided over thousands of hearings. Every detail was under his control, from the air conditioning temperature to the angle of the security cameras. The bailiff announced the first case of the morning in a monotonous voice. State of Illinois versus Thomas Anderson. Charge: vagrancy, third offense within 30 days. Tom was led to the defendant's bench, his handcuffs removed with a metallic click that echoed through the silent room. He wore the same clothes from 2 nights ago, worn jeans stained with stories of hard days, a military jacket that had seen better times, and combat boots that appeared to be the only belongings still holding some dignity. His gray hair was unkempt, but his shoulders stayed straight, bearing the posture of a soldier who, though broken, had not completely forgotten who he once was. Mitchell lowered his gaze to the documents before him, his reading glasses reflecting artificial light as he examined Tom's criminal record. Each line he read confirmed his suspicions. Just another typical case, another recurring problem that needed to be removed from Chicago's streets. Mr. Anderson, Mitchell began, his voice cutting through the silence like a sharp blade. I see this is your third arrest for vagrancy in less than a month. It seems you haven't learned your lesson from your previous encounters with our judicial system. Tom swallowed hard, feeling his mouth dry with anxiety. His fingers trembled slightly, not just from alcohol withdrawal, but from the gravity of the moment. He knew he had only one chance to be heard, a chance to make this powerful man understand his situation. Your Honor, Tom began, his voice hoarse but steady, still carrying traces of the Midwest accent where he grew up. I know it looks bad, but if you'll let me explain, I didn't choose to be on the streets, sir. I served my country for 20 years, 3 tours in Afghanistan, and when I came back. His voice faltered for a moment, the words caught in his throat like thorns. Mitchell raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable, showing no sign of genuine interest. "Go on, Mr. Anderson, but be brief." Tom took a deep breath, gathering courage. "When I came back from my last mission, things weren't the same anymore. Couldn't sleep, Your Honor. Every night I heard explosions, saw the faces of my comrades who didn't make it back. My wife, she tried to help me, but I was so lost." His voice broke for a second, but he quickly regained composure in the gallery. Some veterans who had come to support Tom leaned forward, their faces marked by the painful recognition of the words they heard. A black man in his 40s, wearing a jacket with the Marine Corps emblem, clenched his fists on his knees. Next to him, a female veteran whispered a silent prayer. "PTSD," Tom continued, the word coming out like a heavy burden. "The VA doctor said I had severe PTSD, but the waitlist for treatment, it was months, Your Honor, and I needed to work to support my family. But the nightmares, the flashbacks during the day, I couldn't concentrate. I lost 3 jobs in 6 months." Mitchell discreetly glanced at his watch, a gold tag Heuer he had received from Margaret on his last birthday. Impatience began to show as he drummed his fingers on the table. "Mr. Anderson," Mitchell interrupted abruptly, his voice sharp as Chicago's winter ice. "The court has heard this story countless times. Personal problems, stress disorders, financial difficulties. Every defendant who passes through here has a sad story to tell." Tom felt the blood drain from his face. "But Your Honor, I'm not making this up. I have medical documents, letters of recommendation from my military superiors. I just need help, not punishment. If I could get access to a rehabilitation program, proper PTSD treatment." "Enough!" Mitchell slammed the gavel hard, the sound ringing through the room like a gunshot. Several people in the gallery startled, but Tom remained still, his eyes fixed on the judge. "Mr. Anderson, let me be clear. This court is not a social service center. We are not responsible for solving every personal problem defendants bring here." The judge stood, his imposing figure casting a shadow over Tom. "The statistics are clear and undeniable. The recidivism rate among individuals like you is 80%. Rehabilitation programs, as you suggest, cost taxpayers thousands of dollars per person, and the results are, at best, disappointing." A murmured protest began rising from the gallery. The Marine veteran half stood from his chair but was pulled back by the woman beside him. "This isn't fair," he whispered, his voice full of outrage. Mitchell continued, completely ignoring the unrest behind him. "What I see before me, Mr. Anderson, is simply another vagrant using his military history as a shield to escape the consequences of his choices. Chicago has real problems: rising crime, budget deficits, hardworking citizens who deserve safe and clean streets." The words hit Tom like physical blows. His eyes filled with tears he fought to hold back, but his military dignity would not let him fully bend before the cruelty. "People like you," Mitchell went on, his voice growing even colder, "are a burden to our society. They drain resources that could help working families, occupy space that should be available for legitimate business, and create an atmosphere of insecurity that drives away investments and tourism." Tension in the gallery was reaching a boiling point. Several veterans shifted restlessly in their seats, their faces red with indignation. An elderly woman, clearly the mother of a veteran, wiped tears silently from her eyes. Tom tried once more, his voice now choked with emotion. "Your Honor, please, I'm not asking for charity. I served my country, lost friends defending our freedom. All I'm asking is a chance to rehabilitate, to become a productive citizen again." "Mr. Anderson." Mitchell cut him off again, returning to his chair with deliberately slow movements. "Your claims are irrelevant to the case at hand. What matters here are the facts. You were found sleeping on private property for the 3rd time within a month. That constitutes vagrancy, as defined by Chicago municipal law." Mitchell shuffled some papers, his theatrical and calculated movements heightening the room's anxiety. "Considering your recidivism and the need to send a clear message to others who might be tempted to follow the same path, this court has decided that a harsher measure is necessary." The silence in the room was deafening. broken only by Tom's heavy breathing and the outraged whispers from the gallery. Mitchell adjusted his glasses once more, savoring the moment of absolute power. "Mr. Anderson," he declared, his voice echoing with final authority. "This court sentences you to the maximum penalty of 6 months in the Cook County Jail, with no possibility of parole. Perhaps months behind bars will teach you the value of respecting the laws of this city." A shout of protest erupted from the gallery. The Marine veteran couldn't hold back anymore. "This is injustice. He fought for this country." Other veterans joined the protest, their voices forming a chorus of outrage that made the courtroom walls tremble. Tom stood there, absorbing the blow of the sentence as he had learned to absorb explosions on the battlefield, with silent resistance that hid the devastation within. 6 months. 6 months away from any chance of treatment. 6 months that could mean the definitive end of any hope for recovery. Mitchell struck the gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order, but the damage was done. On that cold November day, 2 lives collided irreversibly, and the ripples of that collision were beginning to spread far beyond the walls of that courtroom. The echo of Mitchell's gavel still reverberated through the courtroom walls when Tom felt something break inside his chest. It was as if all the barriers he had built over years of suffering crumbled at once. His knees shook, not just from the weight of the sentence, but from the pain of being judged by someone who should have been the most important person in his life. "Wait!" Tom shouted, his voice tearing through the tense air like a battle cry. "Please wait!" The entire courtroom turned toward him, including the guards already stepping forward to escort him back to his cell. Mitchell, who was arranging his papers with mechanical movements, abruptly lifted his head, his eyebrows furrowed in irritation. "Mr. Anderson, the sentence has already been given. Any appeals must be—" "No, this isn't about an appeal," Tom interrupted, his voice broken but determined. His hands shook violently as he bent down to reach for his old military backpack lying on the floor beside the defendant's table. The guards tensed, hands instinctively moving toward their batons, but Tom moved deliberately slowly. I have something I need to show," Tom murmured, his words heavy with desperate urgency. His fingers frantically searched the backpack's inner pocket, touching familiar objects. A broken compass, yellowed letters from his ex-wife, military discharge papers. Finally, his fingers found what he was looking for. A small photo, its edges worn by time and constant handling. The photo paper had yellowed and become brittle, but the image was still clear. Tom pulled it out carefully, like handling an invaluable treasure. "This photo," Tom said, his voice now a whisper full of emotion. "This photo is ours." The room fell completely silent. Even the outraged whispers from the gallery stopped entirely. The only sounds were the low hum of the air conditioning and Tom's heavy breathing as he struggled to stay upright. Mitchell, still irritated by the interruption, held out his hand impatiently. "Mr. Anderson, this is highly irregular. There is no precedent for—" "Please," Tom begged, holding the photo out toward the judge. "Just look. Just one look." Something in Tom's tone, a mixture of despair and hope that cut through all the courtroom formality, made Mitchell hesitate. Maybe it was curiosity, or something deeper he couldn't identify. Reluctantly, he reached out and took the photo. The moment his eyes focused on the image, Robert Mitchell's world simply stopped. The photo showed a young soldier, maybe 25, wearing a pristine combat uniform. His arms were wrapped lovingly around a child of about 6, who wore a small military-style jacket, clearly a child's replica of the adult uniform. The child was smiling with carefree joy that exists only in childhood, his eyes shining with admiration for the soldier embracing him. What made Mitchell's blood run cold was the instant recognition of that child's face. It was him. Impossible, but it was him. His hands began shaking uncontrollably, making the photo wobble between his fingers. The world around him seemed to vanish. The voices, the faces, reality itself dissolving as he stared at that impossible image. "That photo," Tom continued, his voice thick with tears he could no longer hold back, "was taken in 1985 at Fort Benning Army Base in Georgia. Do you remember Bobby?" Do you remember when your mother took you to visit me at the barracks just before my first mission? Tom's words reached Mitchell like distant echoes. Bobby. Nobody had called him Bobby in decades. Only one person in his entire life used that nickname with affection. Mitchell's mind began racing, fragments of long-buried memories starting to piece together like a puzzle. He vaguely remembered a visit to a military base as a child, wearing a small military jacket that made him feel like a hero. He remembered a man in uniform who held him and promised he'd come back to watch him grow up. You told me, Tom went on, his voice now a choked whisper, that you wanted to be just like me when you grew up. You told me you wanted to help people, protect the innocent, do what's right. Mitchell felt his legs begin to fail. He leaned heavily on the bench, still holding the photo with hands trembling more violently by the second. The image blurred with his tears, but he couldn't look away. Dad. The word slipped from his lips like a barely audible breath, but in the courtroom's absolute silence, everyone heard it. Tom nodded slowly, his own tears now flowing freely down his weathered face. Yes, Bobby. It's me. I'm your dad. The courtroom erupted into shocked murmurs. Reporters whispered frantically to each other. Veterans in the gallery leaned forward, trying to process what they were witnessing, and court staff froze in awe of the moment's magnitude. But Mitchell heard none of it. His mind was wholly focused on the photo in his hands, on the young soldier's face he now recognized as the broken man he'd just sentenced to 6 months in jail. The resemblance was unmistakable. The eyes, the nose shape, the jawline that time and hardship had disguised. You abandoned me? Mitchell murmured, his lost boy's voice completely replacing the judicial authority he had shown moments before. Tom shook his head slowly, decades of separation's pain etched on every line of his face.
No, Bobby.
I never abandoned you. I searched. For years I searched. Your mother moved, changed your name, cut all ties. When I finally found you, she had remarried and... His voice cracked. She said you were happy. Said it was better if I didn't interfere. She said you hated me for leaving. Mitchell stared at the photo, his hands still trembling, while decades of resentment and abandonment collided violently with this new reality. The father he had hated all his life was there before him. Not the hero he imagined, nor the villain he built in his mind, but a broken man who fought his own battles and lost nearly everything. The silence in the courtroom was so deep you could hear hearts beating. Mitchell kept his gaze fixed on the photo, his mind slowly processing the impossible truth. How their lives had entwined without his knowledge. How fate had conspired to bring them face to face in this devastating way. Mitchell held the photograph between his trembling fingers, bringing it close to his face, as if trying to decode a secret message written in a long-forgotten language. Every detail of the image jumped out at him with painful clarity. The texture of the military uniform, the regimental insignias, the genuine smile of the young soldier embracing him. But it was the child's face itself that left him mesmerized. That toothy grin, the bright eyes full of adoration, the small scar above the left eyebrow he still carried, a result of a bicycle accident just weeks before that visit to the base. Everything was there, preserved in time like a capsule of memories he had deliberately buried. I remember, Mitchell whispered, his voice barely audible even in the courtroom's silence. I remember that day. Mom had bought me that little military jacket at the toy store. I was so proud. His voice cracked. You lifted me up on your shoulders and said I'd be the bravest soldier the world had ever seen. Tom nodded slowly, tears blurring his own vision. You also said you wanted to be just like me, that you wanted to protect people and make a difference in the world. Mitchell closed his eyes, letting the long-suppressed memories come back to the surface. He remembered crying when that soldier, his father, had bent down to say goodbye. He remembered grabbing at the uniform, begging him not to leave. He remembered the whispered promise in his ear. I'll come back, Bobby. Daddy always comes back. But you didn't come back, Mitchell said, opening his eyes and staring at Tom with a mix of pain and confusion. Mom said. She said you died. That you were a hero, that you died saving other soldiers on a dangerous mission. Tom ran his hand across his face, wiping tears away and exposing the scars that Mitchell was beginning to recognize. Linda was always good with words. She always knew how to make things easier or harder, depending on what was needed. I don't understand, Mitchell said, his authoritative judge voice completely missing, replaced by the confusion of a lost son. If you were alive, where have you been all these years? Why never? Because I didn't remember, Tom interrupted, his voice heavy with decades of frustration. Bobby, I spent almost 10 years not knowing who I was. Mitchell leaned back in his chair, still holding the photo, as he processed the words. Around the courtroom, reporters whispered frantically, and veterans in the gallery leaned forward, their faces marked by compassion and outrage. Tom began to speak, his voice gaining strength as the painful memories fell into place. It was 1987, my second combat mission. Our unit was patrolling a conflict zone when an IED exploded, an improvised bomb buried in the road. He instinctively touched a scar at his temple, hidden by his gray hair. I woke up 3 weeks later in a military hospital in Germany. I didn't know my name, didn't know where I was, didn't recognize anyone. The doctors said I'd suffered severe brain trauma. My military ID was destroyed in the explosion. Mitchell listened silently, eyes still fixed on the photo, trying to reconcile the heroic father image he had built in his mind with the devastating reality in front of him. It took another 6 months to identify me through dental records, Tom continued. But when they finally found out who I was, when they tried to send me back home, I couldn't remember anything. Your mother, Linda, she had moved away from Atlanta. No one knew where you were. She never mentioned that, Mitchell said, his voice sounding distant. Never said anyone had looked for us. Tom shook his head, bitterness clear on his face. When I finally located you, years later, Linda had already married Richard. You had a new life, a new family. She told me it'd be better for you to believe I died heroically than to know I was alive but broken. Mitchell remembered Richard, the man who had raised him as a stepfather. A meticulous, kind accountant who never raised his voice, never missed a baseball game, never failed to support him financially through school. A man who had been a father in every way except biological. She said you hated me, Mitchell murmured, the words coming out like a confession. That you chose the army over us. I could never hate you, Tom replied, his voice breaking. You were the most important thing in my life. But I was so confused, so lost. The doctors said I might never fully recover my memories. And Linda, she said you were happy, had a good life, that I'd only get in the way. Mitchell looked once more at Tom's face, really seeing beyond the gray beard, the deep wrinkles, and the skin worn by years on the streets. Slowly, like a puzzle being put together, he began to see the familiar features. The shape of the eyes, identical to the ones he saw in the mirror every morning. The strong jawline he had inherited, which always gave him confidence in the courtroom. The shape of the hands, large and capable, now recognized as a genetic inheritance. So you remembered? Mitchell asked, voice almost inaudible. Tom nodded slowly. Fragments. Images coming back like flashes. A blonde-haired boy running on the military base. A voice yelling, Daddy, when I came home from training. And one name, Bobby. Always Bobby. Robert Michael Mitchell, Mitchell said automatically, revealing his full name for the first time. But as a kid, everyone called me Bobby. Tom closed his eyes, absorbing the confirmation he had waited decades to hear. Robert Michael. I remember now. You were named after my father and Linda's brother. The courtroom remained completely silent, the hundreds of people present witnessing a reunion that seemed impossible. Mitchell and Tom stared at each other across the space separating the judge's bench from the defendant's area. A space that suddenly felt like it held decades of pain, misunderstandings, and lost chances. Mitchell looked again at the photo, then at the man before him. His father. The man he had hated his whole life for abandoning him was there, broken and needing his help. The man sentenced to 6 months in jail was the same one who had promised he would come back to watch him grow up. All these years, Mitchell whispered, voice heavy with a pain that felt physical. All these years, I thought you chose to leave, that you didn't care about me enough to stay. All these years, Tom answered, echoing the words. I thought you were better off without me, that it would be selfish for me to interfere in your new life. They stared at each other in silence. Father and son, judge and defendant. Two lives cruelly separated by fate and now reunited in the most unimaginable way. The photo remained in Mitchell's trembling hands, the only tangible proof that they had once been a family, that love had once existed between them. The weight of decades of pain and misunderstanding hung in the air between them, thick as winter fog, as they both struggled to grasp the magnitude of what had just been revealed. Mitchell brought down the gavel once, the sound echoing through the courtroom like a gunshot. His voice, usually steady and controlled, trembled as he said, "The hearing is adjourned. Everyone present, please remain in your seats." He stood abruptly, the photo still clutched in his hand, and gestured to the security officer. "Mr. Patterson, please escort Mr. Anderson to conference room number 3. Now." The murmurs from the gallery grew louder, but Mitchell heard nothing except the blood pounding in his ears. His footsteps echoed through the courthouse halls as he followed Tom and the guard, watching the man's hunched shoulders. The man he had just discovered was his father. The conference room was small and stark, with only a metal table and a few chairs. When the door closed behind them, the silence became oppressive. Mitchell dismissed the guard with a nod, left alone with Tom for the first time in 37 years. "Sit down," Mitchell said, his voice wavering between courtroom formality and the vulnerability of a wounded son. His hands shook as he pulled the phone from the inside pocket of his robe. Tom sat slowly, his knees creaking. Up close, Mitchell noticed even more details he had missed over all those years apart. Deep wrinkles around the eyes, scars cutting across the left temple, calloused hands that looked like they had done heavy labor. "I need to call her," Mitchell said, more to himself than to Tom. "I need to hear it from her mouth." His fingers dialed a number he knew by heart, even though he had called only a few times in recent years. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Bobby? What a surprise to hear your voice in the middle of the day, dear." Margaret Mitchell's voice sounded just as Mitchell remembered. Refined, polite, with a slight southern accent she had adopted after moving to Charleston. At 70 years old, she still carried that youthful quality she always used to mask difficult conversations. "Mom," Mitchell began, his voice sounding strange even to himself. "I need you to tell me something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." There was a pause on the other end. Margaret had always been sharp enough to notice nuances in her son's voice. "Of course, dear. What's going on? You sound upset." Mitchell looked at Tom, who sat with his hands clasped on the table, eyes fixed on the photo Mitchell had placed between them. "My father, Thomas Anderson. You told me he died in combat when I was 6. The silence on the other end lasted too long to be natural. When Margaret finally spoke, her voice had lost some of its cheerfulness. "Bobby, why are you asking about this? That was so long ago." "Because he's sitting right in front of me right now," Mitchell said, the words coming out like a forced confession. "He's alive, Mom. He's always been alive." The sound from the other line was like a long, defeated sigh. Margaret stayed silent so long that Mitchell thought she had hung up. "Mom," he insisted, How did he find you?" Margaret's voice now trembled, her composure completely gone. The question confirmed Mitchell's worst fears. "So you knew he was alive." "Bobby, dear, you don't understand. Things were complicated. We thought he had died. So much time passed without news." "No," Mitchell interrupted, his voice gaining strength. "Don't tell me that. I need the truth, the whole truth. Now." Tom raised his eyes from the table, watching Mitchell with a mix of pain and hope. It was clear he was listening to pieces of the conversation too. Margaret sighed deeply. "Okay, but you have to understand I did what I thought was best for you, Bobby. Always did. Speak. When your father left for that second mission, I was 2 months pregnant." Margaret began, her voice now a whisper, as if confessing a secret. "I lost the baby a week after he left. Complications. The doctor said I couldn't have any more children. Mitchell closed his eyes, absorbing news he had never known. Months passed without any word. Margaret continued. The army didn't know anything. No body, no confirmation. I was alone with you, no money, living in that tiny apartment in Atlanta. I was desperate, Bobby. Keep going. When I met Richard, you were 8. He was kind, steady, financially stable. He offered us a life I couldn't give you on my own. But he made it clear he didn't want complications from the past. Mitchell opened his eyes, looking directly at Tom. He saw on his father's face the same expression of betrayal he felt in his own heart. Richard officially adopted you when you turned 10, Margaret said. We changed your last name to Mitchell, moved to a new city. It was a fresh start for all of us. And when did my father try to find you? Mitchell asked, his voice sharp. The silence stretched again, and when Margaret spoke, she was clearly crying. There were some calls from military hospitals, someone asking about family members of Thomas Anderson. But Bobby, so many years had passed. You were happy. You had a father who loved you, a stable life, and we were planning to move into a bigger house. You ignored the calls, Mitchell said, stating, not asking. I thought it was best, Margaret said, her voice breaking completely. You had adjusted. You called Richard Dad. I didn't want to mess that up with ghosts from the past, especially if Tom was hurt or not the man we knew anymore. Mitchell felt something break inside his chest. You lied to me. My whole life you lied. I protected you, Margaret yelled from the other end. Her composure finally shattered. I did what I thought was right. Do you have any idea how hard it was? Raising you alone, not knowing if your father was dead or alive. And when I finally had the chance to give you a better life, a complete family, a family built on lies, Mitchell interrupted. Richard loved you like his own son. He paid for your education, supported all your dreams. He was a father to you. But he wasn't my father, Mitchell shouted, slamming his free hand on the table. Tom flinched but kept watching. My real father was in military hospitals, trying to remember who he was, trying to come home, and you knew. Margaret was openly sobbing now. I was afraid, Bobby. Afraid that if you knew he was alive but different hurt, it would destroy the image you had of him. You always talked about your father as a hero. I thought it was better to preserve that. So you decided for me? Mitchell said, his voice cold. You decided I didn't have the right to know the truth. I did the best I could with the information I had. Margaret weakly defended herself. Mitchell looked back at Tom, seeing decades of pain reflected in his father's eyes. How many nights had Tom spent awake, trying to piece together fragments of a family he had lost? How many times had he wondered if he really had a son named Bobby? He looked for me, didn't he? Mitchell asked, now barely above a whisper. When he finally remembered, he tried to find me. Margaret was silent for so long that Mitchell almost repeated the question. Yes, she finally admitted. About 15 years ago, he showed up at our door in Charleston. Richard wasn't home. Tom looked different, thinner, older, scarred. He said he was trying to rebuild his life, that he wanted to meet his son. And what did you say to him? I told him you'd graduated from law school, that you were successful, married, happy. I said it would be best if he didn't interfere, that you'd built a life without him. Mitchell closed his eyes, imagining the scene. His father, finally summoning the courage to find the family he had lost, rejected at the doorstep where he should have been welcomed. Did he ask where I was? He did, but I didn't say. I told him you moved away and didn't want contact with the past. The silence in the conference room was so deep Mitchell could hear his own breathing. Tom stared at his hands, his shoulders trembling slightly. 37 years, Mitchell murmured into the phone. 37 years of lies. Bobby, please. You have to understand. Mitchell hung up without another word. The sound of the phone hitting the table echoed through the room like a final period. He sat heavily in the chair across from Tom, the photo still between them, now looking like an artifact from a life that might have been. The weight of decades of lost opportunities, lonely Christmases, graduations never shared, a lifetime lived without truly knowing where he came from, crashed over him like an emotional avalanche. She was scared, Mitchell finally said, more to justify to himself than to Tom. She was trying to protect me. Tom slowly lifted his eyes. And you? Can you forgive me for not fighting harder to find you? Mitchell looked at the man in front of him. Broken, aged, but still undeniably his father, and felt something inside his heart completely shatter. It wasn't just anger or sadness, but a deep pain for lost time that could never be recovered. The hours dragged on in the small conference room, but neither Mitchell nor Tom seemed to notice the passage of time. Outside, rumors rippled through the courthouse halls, but inside those four walls, father and son existed in a time bubble where decades of separation slowly dissolved through carefully chosen words and silence heavy with meaning. Mitchell had taken off his judicial robe, leaving it hanging on the back of his chair as a symbol of authority temporarily set aside. His white shirt was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and for the first time in years, he didn't care about his appearance. "Tell me about the hospitals," Mitchell said softly, his hands clasped together on the table. "Tell me about what it was like to wake up not knowing who you were." Tom took a deep breath, his eyes lost in a distant, painful memory. The first few months felt like living in a constant nightmare. Imagine waking up every day and not recognizing your own reflection in the mirror. The doctors said my name, Thomas Anderson, but it was just meaningless sounds, like hearing someone speak in a foreign language. He paused, unconsciously touching the scar on his temple. I knew something was missing. There was this constant feeling of loss, like I had left something important somewhere but couldn't remember what. The therapists called it anticipatory grief. My mind knew I had lost something precious, even without knowing exactly what. Mitchell listened intently, trying to imagine the horror of losing not just memories, but your very identity. How did you survive that? At first, I didn't want to survive, Tom admitted, his voice barely audible. I went through 3 different hospitals, VA medical centers in different cities. The doctors ran tests constantly, cognitive, neurological, psychiatric. They said I had suffered a severe traumatic brain injury, that it was a miracle I was alive. He leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. There were other soldiers in those hospitals, some with amputated limbs, others with PTSD, many with invisible wounds like mine. We became a strange family of broken men trying to figure out how to keep living. When did the memories start coming back? Fragments at first. It would be unfair to call them memories, they were more like feelings. The smell of motor oil would make me cry without knowing why. The sound of a child laughing in the hospital park would unsettle me for days. There was this song, a lullaby I caught myself humming but couldn't remember where I learned it. Mitchell felt a tightness in his chest. He knew that lullaby. His mother used to sing it to him as a child, but she had stopped after Richard came into their lives. She said it was a silly song, too childish. That was the song that brought me back, Tom continued. One night, about 5 years after the blast, I was lying in a rehabilitation center bed in Colorado, humming that melody. Suddenly, I saw a small boy with blonde hair asking me to sing, "One more time, Daddy." The image was so clear I jumped out of bed, running down the halls shouting the name Bobby. Mitchell swallowed hard, tears forming in his eyes. You remembered me. Not completely. It was like having a blurry picture of something precious. I knew I had a son named Bobby. I knew I loved him more than life itself, but I couldn't recall the details. I didn't remember your mother. I didn't remember where we lived. I didn't recall your full last name. Tom paused, looking directly at Mitchell. But I remembered your small hands holding mine. I remembered how you would run to meet me when I came home from work. I remembered promising to teach you to drive when you turned 16. Mitchell's tears finally began to fall. He remembered that promise too, one of the few clear memories he had of his father before he left for the second mission. From there, the memories started returning more often. Tom went on. I remembered being married to a woman named Linda. I remembered living on a military base in Atlanta. The doctors said my brain was healing, making new neural connections to replace the damaged ones. How long did it take for you to remember everything? Years. Even now, there are gaps. Entire periods of my life that just disappeared. But enough came back for me to know who I was and what I had lost. Mitchell wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, trying to keep composed. And when you finally left the hospitals? Tom smiled sadly. I was medically retired from the Army in 1992, 100% disabled. I had spent 5 years going from hospitals to rehab centers. When I was finally discharged, I was a different man than the one I'd been before the explosion. What do you mean? Brain injuries changed my personality. Before the accident, I was outgoing, confident, sociable. After, I had trouble trusting people, I suffered severe anxiety, and I struggled to keep jobs. The therapist said it was a combination of physical and emotional trauma. Mitchell nodded slowly, starting to understand the path that had led his father to the streets. And that's when you started looking for me? Obsessively, Tom admitted. It was the only thing that gave me purpose. I hired private detectives with the retirement money. I searched public records. I visited military bases where I had served, hoping someone would remember Linda and Bobby Anderson. He paused, frustration decades in the making clear in his voice. But Bobby Anderson didn't exist. And I didn't know you had changed your last name. I spent thousands of dollars chasing ghosts. How did you find out I was Bobby Mitchell? Tom laughed bitterly. Pure luck or maybe fate. 3 years ago, I was living in a veterans shelter here in Riverside. I saw your photo in the newspaper, a story about a young judge appointed to the criminal court. Something about your face seemed familiar, but I was seeing familiar faces everywhere in those days. He leaned forward, eyes shining with the memory. Then I read your full name in the story. The Honorable Robert Michael Mitchell. Robert Michael. Those were the names I whispered during therapy sessions, names coming from fragments of my memories. Mitchell closed his eyes, absorbing the cruel irony. You lived in the same city as me for 3 years. 3 years watching you from afar. I'd go to your public trials sometimes, sitting in the back of the gallery, trying to find the courage to approach you but always losing it at the last moment. Why? Because you had become everything I always wanted you to be, Tom said, his voice full of pride and sadness. You were respected, successful, living a life I could never offer. And I was a homeless veteran living on government benefits. How could I come up to you and say, "Hi, I'm your dad"? Mitchell shook his head, feeling anger. Not at Tom, but at the cruel situation that had separated them. You should have tried. I should have, Tom agreed. But every time I saw you in that courtroom, with your robe, your authority, your organized life, I felt more and more inadequate. I had failed as a father once. I didn't want to fail again by invading your life. Now it was Mitchell's turn to speak, his voice trembling. Let me tell you about my life without you, about what your absence did to me. Tom nodded, ready to hear truths he knew would be painful. I spent my entire childhood idealizing you, Mitchell began. My mother told me stories about the brave soldier who died saving other men. She said you were a hero, that you sacrificed your life protecting innocent people. That became my moral compass. He paused, looking at his own hands. When Richard became my stepfather, he was kind and helpful, but I always felt something was missing. He was never military, never had that strength I remembered in you. So I created an idealized version of my biological father to fill the gap. How did that affect your choices? Everything I did was to honor your memory. I studied law because I wanted to be someone who protected the innocent like I thought you had done. I specialized in criminal law because I wanted to fight injustice. I accepted the appointment as a judge because I wanted the authority to make a difference. Mitchell leaned back in his chair, the weight of irony almost physical. But somewhere along the way I became rigid, inflexible. I developed a reputation for being harsh on criminals, especially those I saw as weak in character. Tom closed his eyes, as if he could predict where the confession was headed. I was especially hard on veterans, Mitchell continued, his voice breaking. Veterans who appeared in my courtroom for minor crimes, for living on the streets, for drug or alcohol problems. I thought, how can these men dishonor the uniform? How can they waste the opportunities my heroic father never had the chance to enjoy? Tears began to stream down Mitchell's face. I sentenced dozens of men just like you, Dad. Men broken by the system, men who fought for our country and came home wounded. I sent them to overcrowded prisons because I thought they were choosing to be failures. Tom reached across the table, gently touching Mitchell's fingers. You didn't know. But I should have known. Mitchell exploded, slamming his free hand on the table. I should have had compassion. I should have understood that not all heroes come home whole. But I was so focused on the perfect image I had created of you that I couldn't see the real heroes sometimes need help. They both cried silently for several minutes, the weight of decades of misunderstandings and missed chances filling the space between them. Mitchell thought of all the veterans he had sentenced harshly, wondering how many of them had stories like his father's. I became everything you wouldn't have wanted me to become, Mitchell said finally. I became someone without compassion for the wounded, the broken, the lost. No, Tom said firmly. You became someone with high standards, someone who fights for justice. That's exactly what I would have wanted. Compassion can be learned, Bobby. The moral integrity you show, that's something much rarer. Mitchell looked at his father through his tears. How can you forgive me? How can you not hate me for how I treated men like you? Because you're my son, Tom answered simply. And because now you understand. That's what matters. Mitchell wiped his face, feeling something fundamental shift inside him. Decades of misdirected anger, impossible standards, harsh judgments were dissolving, replaced by a deep understanding of the complexity of human life. I'm going to overturn your sentence, Mitchell said suddenly, his voice gaining strength. I'll expunge your charges. I'll use my position to make sure you get the services you should have gotten decades ago. Tom shook his head. It's not about me, Bobby. It's about all the other men like me who will pass through your court. It's about using this experience to make a difference for them. Mitchell nodded slowly, realizing his father was right. This wasn't just about the two of them. It was about breaking a cycle of misunderstanding that had gone on far too long. I'll do more than that, Mitchell said, his voice now steady with determination. I'll change everything. The way this system treats veterans, the way we handle homelessness, the way we approach justice versus rehabilitation. Everything. Tom smiled through his tears, seeing in his son not just the boy he had lost, but the man he could be. Now you're talking like the son I always dreamed of having. Mitchell stood up from the chair, a new resolve filling his heart. He knew what he was about to do would change not only their lives but potentially the lives of countless other men and women forgotten by a system meant to protect them. I'm ready to go back to the courtroom, he said, extending his hand to his father. We're ready to do this right. The murmur in the courtroom gallery grew louder as Mitchell pushed open the heavy oak doors, Tom walking beside him with hesitant steps. The past 4 hours had changed not only their lives but also fanned the rumors that spread through the hallways like wildfire. Reporters who usually covered routine cases now filled every available seat, cameras discreetly positioned to capture what everyone felt was a historic moment. Mitchell had put his robe back on, but something in his posture had fundamentally shifted. His shoulders, once rigidly straight, now carried the weight of understanding. His eyes, usually cold and calculating behind his glasses, glimmered with a vulnerability no one in the room had ever seen. All rise for the Honorable Judge Mitchell. The bailiff announced, but his voice lacked its usual authority. Even he seemed to sense something extraordinary was about to happen. Mitchell took his seat behind the bench, the gavel trembling slightly in his hands. Tom stood beside the defense table, his handcuffs removed during the break, fingers intertwined in front of him as if praying. The silence that fell over the courtroom was unlike anything Mitchell had ever experienced. It wasn't the respectful silence of a routine hearing, but the tense quiet of an audience knowing they were about to witness history. Please be seated, Mitchell said, his voice echoing slightly through the sound system. He cleared his throat, looking directly into the cameras for the first time in his career. Before we proceed with this hearing, There are matters of extreme importance that must be addressed. He paused, his eyes meeting Tom's. For a moment, father and son communicated through a look that spanned decades of separation. The case of the state versus Thomas Anderson presents extraordinary circumstances that demand an equally extraordinary response from this court. Mitchell continued, his voice gaining strength. After a careful review of the facts presented, and considering information that came to light during the recess, this court hereby takes the following actions. The sound of pens scratching on paper and the low hum of cameras created a symphony of anticipation. Reporters leaned forward, sensing they were about to witness something unprecedented. First, Mitchell declared, raising a document. All charges against Mr. Thomas Anderson are immediately dropped and dismissed. Mr. Anderson's criminal record related to this case will be fully expunged. A murmur of surprise swept through the gallery. It was rare, though not unheard of, to see charges dropped mid-hearing, but the solemnity with which Mitchell announced it suggested there was more to come. Second, Mitchell continued, his voice now trembling with emotion. This court acknowledges that a grave injustice was committed, not only against Mr. Anderson but against countless veterans who have appeared before this court over the years. He stood, removing his glasses and wiping them with visibly trembling hands. When he put them back on, his eyes shone with unshed tears. What you don't know, what I myself didn't know until a few hours ago, is that Thomas Anderson is my father. The silence that followed was absolute, as if all the oxygen had been sucked from the room. Then, like a crashing wave, voices rose in urgent whispers, camera flashes began to blink, and the frantic tapping of laptop keys filled the air. Mitchell struck the gavel once, restoring order, but his authority now came from a different place. Not position, but the raw truth he was sharing. My father is a veteran of 2 wars who served his country with distinction, Mitchell said, his voice ringing clear and strong throughout the courtroom. He suffered severe combat wounds, including a traumatic brain injury that resulted in complete amnesia. For years, he fought to rebuild his identity while navigating an overwhelmed and inadequate military healthcare system. Tom stood motionless, tears streaming down his weathered face. He had never imagined his story would be told this way, in a courtroom full of strangers, by a son he had lost for so long. During these years apart, Mitchell continued, I lived believing my father had died a hero. That belief shaped who I became but also blinded me to the realities faced by veterans who returned injured and lost. He paused, looking directly at the gallery, where he could see faces of veterans who had appeared before his court. Some he recognized, men he had sentenced harshly, believing he was administering severe but fair justice. I must confess to you, especially to the veterans present, that I terribly failed in my duty, Mitchell said, his voice breaking slightly. I convicted men and women who had served our country, men and women whose only crimes were failing to find their way back to a society that had forgotten them. Sandy Martinez, sitting in the front row, brought her hand to her mouth, suddenly grasping the magnitude of the moment she was witnessing. Beside her, other defense attorneys nodded slowly, recognizing their own frustrations with the system's apparent lack of compassion. I judged those men and women with the arrogance of someone who had never faced true adversity, Mitchell admitted. I condemned them not out of compassion or understanding, but by impossible standards derived from an idealized image I had created of my own father. Tom made a motion as if to interrupt, wanting to shield his son from the public exposure of his pain, but Mitchell gently stopped him with a gesture. Today, I learned that the man I had idealized and the man I had condemned are one and the same, Mitchell said. My father, the war hero, was also the homeless veteran I sentenced harshly exactly 15 months ago. The impact of this revelation rippled through the room like a shockwave. Reporters typed furiously, lawyers exchanged incredulous glances, and in the gallery, ordinary people began openly weeping. Thomas Anderson isn't just my father, Mitchell continued, his voice now steady despite the tears. He is a symbol of systemic failures that allow our heroes to fall through the cracks of a society that forgets them as soon as we no longer need them. He turned to Tom, speaking directly to him but amplified so the whole room could hear. Dad, I ask for your forgiveness. Forgive me for not recognizing you when you needed recognition the most. Forgive me for judging you when I should have helped you. Forgive me for the lost years we can never recover. Tom tried to speak, but the words caught in his emotion-choked throat. Mitchell then faced the gallery, his eyes searching for specific faces. And to all the veterans who have appeared before this court, to all the men and women who served our country only to be failed by our justice system, I humbly ask forgiveness. You deserved compassion, understanding, and help. Instead, you received judgment and punishment. A man in the third row, retired Major James Rodriguez, whom Mitchell had sentenced to 6 months for vagrancy 2 years ago, slowly stood and began to applaud. Other veterans in the gallery joined him, and soon the entire courtroom echoed with applause that had less to do with approval and more with recognition of a profound moment of redemption. Mitchell waited for the applause to die down before continuing. Effective immediately, I am requesting an indefinite leave of absence from my duties as judge. I need this time to learn how to be a better man and, hopefully, a better son. The murmur of surprise was immediate. Judges rarely step away from their positions, especially amid active cases. During my absence, Mitchell said, I hope to work with local veterans organizations to develop programs addressing the root causes that bring our veterans into the criminal justice system. Our focus must be rehabilitation, not punishment. He looked once more at Tom, seeing in his father's face a mixture of pride, love, and forgiveness he did not deserve but was infinitely grateful for. This case stands as a reminder that behind every person who appears before a court is a complex story, invisible wounds, and circumstances beyond what we see on the surface. Mitchell concluded. As judges, as a society, we must do better. He struck the gavel one last time. This court is now adjourned indefinitely. What followed was unlike anything anyone in the courtroom had ever witnessed. Reporters rushed to their phones, lawyers embraced, and in the gallery, people openly wept. But at the center of it all, Tom Anderson, war veteran, homeless man, lost father, was being held by the son he had searched for decades. Mitchell stepped down from the bench and walked directly to Tom, removing his judicial robe as he went. When he reached his father, he simply opened his arms. I'm so sorry, Dad, Mitchell whispered into Tom's shoulder. I'm so sorry for everything. Tom grasped his son's shoulders, looking at the man he had become. You have nothing to apologize for, Bobby. You have become exactly the kind of man I always dreamed you'd be. Today, you proved it. Around them, the courtroom remained alive. Reporters telling one of the most extraordinary stories of their careers, lawyers debating the legal and social implications of what they had witnessed, and citizens processing the emotional complexity of the moment. But for Tom and Mitchell, none of that mattered. For the first time in 37 years, father and son were together, and though they couldn't reclaim lost time, they had a whole life ahead to rebuild what had been broken. Sandy Martinez approached carefully, not wanting to interrupt but feeling she needed to be part of this historic moment. Judge Mitchell, she said softly, thank you for your honesty, your courage, and for reminding us why we entered this profession. Mitchell nodded, still embracing his father. Thank you for fighting for him when I couldn't see who he really was. As father and son left the courtroom together, flashbulbs popped and microphones were thrust forward, but they walked inside a bubble of mutual rediscovery. There was much work ahead. Hearings for leave, programs to develop, relationships to rebuild. But for now, it was enough just to walk side by side. Two men who had found each other against all odds. The real journey was just beginning. Mitchell's mansion in Riverside Heights stretched majestically among ancient oak trees, its Georgian windows reflecting the late afternoon sun like golden eyes. Tom stood frozen at the circular cobblestone driveway, his belongings, a worn military backpack holding literally everything he owned, hesitantly slung over his shoulder. Is this where you live? He asked, his voice filled with disbelief. The immaculate lawn spread out over acres, dotted with meticulously maintained flower beds and a stone fountain that softly murmured in the center of the front garden. Mitchell stopped beside the black BMW, keys still in hand, suddenly seeing his home through his father's eyes. Yes, he replied simply. though there was a note of embarrassment in his voice. The contrast between their realities. A 7-bedroom mansion versus the shelter where Tom had spent the previous night was stark. "Bobby, I can't. This is too much," Tom muttered, taking a step back. "Maybe I should stay at the Veterans Arms Hotel for a few more days until we figure out something more." "Dad," Mitchell interrupted gently, using the word that still felt strange on his tongue. "This is your home now. It always was. I just didn't know it." He walked toward the front door, a double mahogany entrance adorned with beveled glass. "I built all of this thinking about success, about status, about impressing people who didn't even matter. But it's empty, Dad. Completely empty without family to fill it." Tom followed slowly, his eyes taking in every detail. The entry hall rose 2 stories, with a sweeping marble staircase dominating the space. Expensive paintings hung on the walls, and a crystal chandelier suspended from the high ceiling scattered colorful prisms of light onto the polished floor. "How long have you lived here?" Tom asked, nervously touching a console table that likely cost more than many people made in a year. 5 years, Mitchell answered, placing his keys on a silver tray. "I bought it after being appointed judge. I thought I needed a house that fit the position." He watched Tom survey the space with eyes that had seen both much luxury and much suffering, unimpressed easily. "Lucia comes 3 times a week for cleaning, and Harold takes care of the gardens. Otherwise, it's usually just me here." "You never got married?" Tom asked, although the absence of personal photos or feminine touches had already answered his question. Mitchell shook his head. "I dated some women over the years, but I never really connected with anyone. My old therapist said I was emotionally unavailable." Tom nodded understandingly. "Abandonment trauma. I read about it in the hospitals. When a child loses a parent early, especially under confusing circumstances, they can develop defense mechanisms that make trusting future relationships difficult." The clinical candor of the observation caught Mitchell off guard. "Did you study psychology?" "I had a lot of time to read during rehab," Tom said with a sad smile, "and a lot of therapy sessions. I learned about trauma as much as some professionals." Mitchell led his father through the house, showing him the wood-paneled library, the formal living room he rarely used, and the gourmet kitchen where he usually just reheated frozen food. Every room was impeccably decorated and completely impersonal. "Here," Mitchell said, opening a door at the end of the second-floor hallway. "I thought you might like this suite." Tom stepped slowly into what was clearly a full apartment inside the bigger house. There was a cozy living room with a fireplace, a bedroom with a king-sized bed that looked unused, a full bathroom with a whirlpool tub, and even a small kitchenette. "Mitchell, this is bigger than some apartments I've lived in," Tom said, carefully placing his backpack on the floor. "Are you sure you don't mind?" "I'm sure," Mitchell replied firmly. "Actually, I was thinking, if you feel comfortable, maybe we could have dinner together tonight. I could order Thai food, or Chinese, or whatever you like." Tom turned to look at his son, seeing beyond the successful facade the loneliness Mitchell carried. "I'd love that, Bobby. But it's been a while since I've eaten anything fancy. Maybe we could start with something simple? Burgers," Mitchell suggested hopefully. "Burgers sound perfect." That night, they sat at Mitchell's formal dining table, a mahogany table for 12, eating burgers and fries straight from greasy bags. The incongruity of the situation wasn't lost on either of them, yet somehow it made the moment more precious. "Tell me about your career," Tom said, wiping ketchup from his fingers. "When did you decide you wanted to be a lawyer?" Mitchell put his burger down, considering the question. "I was 14 when I made the decision. It was the anniversary of the day Mom told me you died. I was angry, feeling the world was unfair, and thought if I could become someone powerful in the legal system, I could fight injustice." "And did it work?" "For a while," Mitchell admitted. "I graduated top of my class at UCLA Law School. I interned at the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office, then worked at a prestigious law firm for 5 years before accepting a position as an assistant district attorney." Tom listened intently, trying to imagine the years he'd lost. "Did you like being a prosecutor?" "I loved it," Mitchell said, his eyes lighting up for the first time. There was something satisfying about building cases, about making sure people who hurt others were held accountable. I had a 92% conviction rate. Impressive. Yes, but... Mitchell paused, looking at his hands. Looking back, I think I was using the job to process my own anger. Every criminal I convicted was, in a way, a victory against the chaos that took over my life when you disappeared. Tom reached across the table, gently touching Mitchell's fingers. You were trying to make sense of a situation that didn't make sense. That's understandable. But it made me hard, Mitchell continued. When I was appointed judge at 32, the youngest in the county's history, I had lost the ability to see nuance. Everything was black or white, guilty or innocent, deserving or undeserving. And the veterans? Mitchell closed his eyes, painful memories of past cases surfacing. They irritated me more than any other kind of defendant. I thought, these people had training, discipline, structure. How could they be wasting their lives? I couldn't understand that military training sometimes breaks people as much as it prepares them. You couldn't have known. But I should have tried to understand, Mitchell insisted. I should have asked questions. Should have sought help for them instead of just handing out punishments. Tom leaned back in his chair, studying the son who had become a stranger to him. Bobby, can I ask you a hard question? Sure. Are you happy? Really happy? The question took Mitchell completely by surprise. He opened his mouth to give an automatic answer, then closed it, truly considering the question. No, he finally admitted. I'm successful, respected, financially secure. But happy? No, never really happy. Why do you think that is? Mitchell thought carefully. I think because I built my whole life around honoring the memory of someone I didn't really know. Every decision I made was based on trying to live up to an impossible standard. And in the process, I became someone I don't even really like. But you can change that, Tom said softly. Now you can build a life based on who you really are, not on who you think you should be. Over the following days, Mitchell arranged the best medical treatment money could buy. Dr. Patricia Reese, one of the West Coast's leading military PTSD specialists, came to the house for an initial consultation. Dr. Michael Chun, a renowned neurologist, examined Tom's old brain injuries. A team of trauma specialists was hired for regular therapy sessions. Tom initially resisted the extensive medical attention. Bobby, this must be costing a fortune, he protested after his third session with Dr. Reese. Dad, I've made more money in the last 5 years than most people make in a lifetime, Mitchell replied. What's the point if I can't use it to help the people I love? Gradually, Tom started adapting to the luxury around him. He learned to use the whirlpool tub to ease joint pain he'd carried for decades. He discovered Mitchell's library contained whole sections on military history and war biographies that he devoured eagerly. Most importantly, he began to allow himself to believe he deserved to be there. Tell me about the war, Mitchell said one evening as they walked through the illuminated garden. Tell me what really happened. Tom was silent for a long time, the sound of his footsteps on gravel marking the quiet. Which war? He finally asked. I served in two. Both, if you want to share. The first was different, Tom began. I was young, idealistic, believing we were making a difference. It was 1970, and I was 18. I thought it would be an adventure. They stopped near the fountain, the sound of water creating a soft soundtrack for painful memories. Reality came fast. On my first day of real combat, I saw my best friend, a kid from Kansas named Danny Morrison, step on a landmine. There wasn't even enough left of him to send home to his mother. Mitchell felt his stomach tighten, trying to imagine his father as a young 18-year-old witnessing such horrors. But you came back, Tom continued. You did your tour, you come home, you try to forget. I met your mother at a base party in 1978. She was beautiful, Bobby. Had this smile that could light up a whole room. She still does, Mitchell said softly. We got married 6 months later. You were born in 1980, and for a few years we thought we'd made it. I had a good job on base, we had a nice little house, and there was you. A perfect little blonde boy who made it all worth it. Tom smiled faintly, lost in memory. You used to run to the door every time you heard my car pull in. No matter how tired I was. Seeing you run to me made all the problems disappear. I remember that, Mitchell said, voice thick with emotion. You used to pick me up and spin me around. Every night, Tom confirmed. And then you'd make me read to you before bed. Always the same 3 books. Where the Wild Things Are, The Cat in the Hat, and that one about the dog who got lost. Harry the Dirty Dog, Mitchell supplied, surprised the memory came back so vividly. That's right, and when I finished reading, you'd always ask for one more story. Tell me about the brave soldiers, Dad. And I made up stories about soldiers who saved people, who were heroes, who always came home to their families. Mitchell stopped walking. You told me war stories that weren't true? Stories about war as I wanted it to be, Tom corrected. About soldiers who never lost friends, who never saw terrible things, who fought for what's right, and who always won. I wanted you to believe in heroes, Bobby. I wanted you to believe there were good people in the world fighting to protect innocent people. And then you were called up for the second mission. Tom's face hardened. 1987. I thought I'd done my part, thought I was done. But the army needed experienced men, and I was good at what I did. Your mother begged me not to go. You cried and clung to my legs at the airport. He paused, the pain still fresh after so many years. I said I'd be back in a year. I promised you I'd come back and teach you to drive when you turned 16. You made a sour face and said that was too long to wait. I remember, Mitchell whispered. I said I'd be too old to want to learn when you got back. And you were right, Tom said with a bitter laugh. When I finally returned, you weren't a child anymore. They resumed their walk, following the path winding through the meticulously kept gardens. The irony was not lost on either of them. Tom had lost decades living on the streets, while Mitchell had built this oasis of prosperity. Tell me about life on the streets, Mitchell said gently. If you want. Tom took a deep breath, the night air heavy with the scent of jasmine from the gardens. The first years were the worst. When I finally left the hospitals in 1992, I had the survival skills of war, but I couldn't keep a job.
My mind was still on the battlefield, and any sharp noise or sideways glance would tear me apart inside.
The bathroom mirror in Tom's suite reflected a man he barely recognized. 3 months of proper medical treatment, regular meals, and, most importantly, hope had transformed the homeless veteran into someone who seemed to have regained his dignity. His hair, now professionally trimmed and streaked with distinguished silver, framed a face where worry lines had softened into character lines. His blue eyes, once dimmed by trauma and abandonment, now shone with renewed purpose. He adjusted his navy blue tie, still feeling awkward wearing expensive suits, but Mitchell had insisted, and Tom was learning to accept love through practical gestures. Today would be special. Mitchell was returning to the courtroom after 3 months of leave, and Tom would be there to witness his son's transformation in the kitchen. Mitchell prepared coffee with hands that trembled slightly from nerves. He was unrecognizable too, not physically but in essence. The stiffness that had defined his movements for years had given way to a more relaxed posture. His eyes, once cold behind glasses, now held genuine warmth. Ready for today? Tom asked, entering the kitchen and taking the coffee cup Mitchell offered. Nervous, Mitchell admitted. It's strange coming back after everything that happened. I feel like a completely different person trying to do the same job. Maybe that's exactly what the system needs, Tom observed, sitting on the kitchen island stool. Someone who understands that justice and compassion aren't mutually exclusive. Mitchell smiled, still marveling at his father's wisdom. The past 3 months had been mutual education. Tom relearning how to live in society, Mitchell learning how to be truly human. The pilot programs you developed are revolutionary, Bobby, Tom continued. The Veterans Court Program, the rehabilitation centers, partnerships with service organizations. You're going to change lives. We're going to change lives, Mitchell corrected. None of this would work without your perspective, your experience. An hour later, the courtroom was packed again. But the atmosphere was completely different from the dramatic scene 3 months earlier. Reporters were present, but now to document a restorative justice experiment that had drawn national attention. Lawyers, veterans, social workers, and community advocates filled the seats, all eager to see how the new Judge Mitchell would run his court. Mitchell entered from the back of the room instead of his usual entrance, walking down the aisles and greeting people he knew. Tom watched with quiet pride as his son stopped to talk to veterans who had appeared before him before, men and women who now saw him not as an adversary but as an advocate. "Mr. Rodriguez," Mitchell said, stopping near retired Major James Rodriguez, one of the first to applaud at the transformative hearing. "How is the transitional housing program going?" "Well, Your Honor," Rodriguez replied, shaking Mitchell's hand firmly. 3 months clean, I have a small apartment, and I start a job next week. Thank you for believing I was worth more than my worst mistake." When Mitchell finally took his seat behind the bench, he paused to look around the room. "Good morning, everyone," he began, and there were soft chuckles at the unusual formality. "Before we proceed with today's cases, I want to talk about the changes we've implemented over the past 3 months. He gestured to a side table where Tom sat with Dr. Patricia Reese and other support team members. The Los Angeles County Veterans Court program isn't just about judging differently. It's about recognizing that veterans appearing before this court need treatment, not punishment. They need guidance, not condemnation. The first case was Jeremy Walsh, an Iraq veteran charged with disturbing the peace after a PTSD episode in a supermarket. 3 months ago, Mitchell would have sentenced him to fines and probation. Today, Jeremy stood beside an attorney and a veteran counselor as part of a comprehensive treatment plan. "Mr. Walsh," Mitchell said, consulting the files, "Dr. Reese reports you've completed 8 weeks of intensive therapy and are responding well to anxiety treatment. How do you feel?" Jeremy, a thin young man with visible scars on his neck, straightened his shoulders. "Better, Your Honor. For the first time since I got back, I feel like I can control the flashbacks. And I want to apologize to the store staff I scared." "That won't be necessary, Mr. Walsh," Mitchell answered kindly. "You were fighting invisible wounds from your service to our country. What matters is you're getting the help you deserve." He paused, flipping through documents. "Your charges are being conditionally dismissed. Continue your therapy, complete the vocational training program we discussed, and in 6 months your record will be completely clear." Jeremy nodded, tears shining in his eyes. "Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you for seeing me as more than a problem." Tom watched case after case handled with this new approach. Veterans, homeless people, individuals struggling with addiction, all receiving not just justice, but compassion and real paths to recovery. During lunch recess, Mitchell and Tom walked through the courthouse gardens, discussing the morning. "Did you see the difference?" Mitchell asked, genuine excitement in his voice. "It's like watching miracles in action," Tom replied. "These are the same kinds of cases you used to judge, but now people leave with hope instead of despair." "The program's gaining national attention," Mitchell said. "I've talked with judges in Chicago, Atlanta, Seattle. Everyone wants to know how to replicate what we're doing here." They were interrupted by the arrival of a familiar figure. Margaret Anderson, now Margaret Collins after 20 years of her second marriage, stood at the garden entrance, visibly nervous. She had aged gracefully but carried decades of guilt in her posture. "Bobby?" she called hesitantly. Mitchell turned, and Tom felt immediate tension in his son's body. "Mother." Margaret approached slowly, her eyes shifting between Mitchell and Tom. When she finally focused on her ex-husband, her hands flew to cover her mouth. "Oh God, Tom. Oh my God. It's really you." "Hello, Maggie," Tom said calmly, using the intimate nickname he hadn't spoken in 3 decades. For a moment, the three stood in awkward silence, the weight of years of pain, miscommunication, and missed opportunities hanging over them like dense fog. "I needed to come," Margaret finally said, her voice breaking slightly. "When I saw the news, when I realized, Tom, forgive me. Please forgive me." "For what?" Tom asked, though his voice carried careful caution. "For giving up," she replied, tears running down her face. "For stopping the search. For believing you were dead when they told me it was probable. For letting Bobby grow up thinking his father was dead when really I I couldn't handle the uncertainty anymore. Mitchell watched the exchange, feeling old wounds reopen. Mom, you told me he had been confirmed killed in action. Margaret shook her head, sobbing. They said missing, presumed dead. But after 2 years of no news, no body found. I couldn't live in hope anymore. It was destroying me and you, Bobby. You cried every night asking when Daddy would come home. So you lied to me? Mitchell said, his voice tense with held emotion. I was protecting you, Margaret answered desperately. Or I thought I was. I thought it would be better for you to accept he was gone than to live in constant hope. Tom stepped forward. Maggie, you did what you thought was best. I can't blame you for that. But I can, Mitchell interrupted, his voice cold. You stole 39 years from me and him. 39 years of relationship, memories of Bobby, Tom said gently, putting a hand on his son's arm. Anger won't bring those years back, but forgiveness can give us the years we still have. Margaret looked between father and son, seeing the dynamic that had developed between them. You two found each other again, she said with sad admiration. After everything, you found each other. We found each other, Tom confirmed. And now we're building something new together. I hoped maybe I could meet the man Bobby has become, Margaret said hesitantly. And maybe find a way to be part of your lives again. Mitchell looked at Tom, seeking guidance. His father nodded almost imperceptibly. This will take time, Mom, Mitchell said finally. A lot of time, and I can't promise we'll ever be a normal family again. But maybe we can start with honest conversations. Margaret nodded eagerly. Anything. I'd do anything to make up at least part of what we lost. Later that night, at home, Mitchell showed Tom a box of files he had requested from the Department of Defense. You were right about the bureaucracy, he said, spreading documents across the library table. Look at this. Tom examined military reports, interagency correspondences, and triplicate forms dating from 1988 to 1992. The paper trail told a story of systematic negligence and communication failure. You were officially listed as MIA, status unknown, for 14 months, Mitchell explained, pointing to relevant documents. During that time, 3 different agencies were responsible for locating you. Each assumed another was handling it. And when they finally realized no one was looking, you had disappeared from the medical system, Mitchell finished. No ID, no records. No way to connect the wounded veteran in VA hospitals with the missing soldier in military files. Tom shook his head in disbelief. How many others do you think? How many other veterans have fallen through these cracks? That's what we're going to find out, Mitchell said, grabbing another thick binder. I've spent the last 2 weeks researching similar cases. There are literally hundreds of veterans wrongly classified as dead when they were really lost in the system. What can we do about it? Mitchell smiled, recalling the 7-year-old son who once asked how they could save the world. I've been working with Senator Patricia Martinez on a bill. The Missing Veterans Accountability Act would create a central database, require communication between agencies, and establish an ombudsman for missing veteran cases. Could that really work? With the right testimony, yes, Mitchell said. Someone who has lived both sides, as a veteran lost in the system and as family left without answers. Tom considered that. You want me to testify before Congress? Only if you want to. But Tom, your story could prevent other families from going through what we did. Tom leaned back in his chair, looking out the library window at the illuminated gardens. 3 months ago, he was sleeping on a bench in Grand Park. Today, he was discussing national policy that could save families. Tell me about the volunteer work, Mitchell said, changing the subject. How's it going at the Veterans Center? Tom's face lit up. It's amazing, Bobby. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I work with veterans fresh out of hospitals. I help them navigate the bureaucracy, find housing, connect with services. And because I've been where they are, they trust me. You're saving lives. We're saving lives, Tom corrected. This program you created, this second chance you gave me, it's creating waves far beyond what we can see. Mitchell looked at the papers spread across the table, evidence of systematic neglect, but also blueprints for systematic change. You know, Dad, all my career I thought justice meant punishment. Now I realize true justice is about restoration. And family, Tom added. True justice is also about bringing people back together who belong to each other. They worked late into the night, father and son united not just by blood but now by a common purpose. On the table between them, legislative drafts mingled with photographs. Some old, from when Mitchell was a child, others new, documenting their new life together. Outside, Los Angeles sparkled in the darkness. A city of millions of individual stories. But inside the lit library, two of those stories had woven together again, creating something stronger than the sum of their parts as the hours passed. Their plans grew more ambitious. Not just legislation to prevent future cases, but reunification programs for families already separated. Not just veterans courts in Los Angeles, but a national network. Not just restorative justice for veterans, but for all whom the system had failed. It's going to take years, Mitchell noted, rubbing his tired eyes. We've got years, Tom replied simply. Now we have time. The October sun bathed the gardens of the Riverside Heights mansion in golden light. White chairs were neatly arranged in simple rows around a makeshift altar beneath a pergola draped with wisteria. The scent of late-blooming roses mingled with eucalyptus, creating the perfect atmosphere for a ceremony of new beginnings. Tom adjusted his tie for the 10th time, his hands trembling slightly, not from fear or trauma, but pure happiness. At 65, wearing a navy suit that Mitchell had insisted on purchasing from the city's finest tailor, he looked like a man who had found not only peace but his place in the world. "Are you nervous, Dad?" Mitchell asked, adjusting his father's shirt cuffs. The judge had taken the day off, something unimaginable 2 years ago, to be present for the most important moment in Tom's new life. Terrified, Tom admitted with a laugh. Who would have thought a veteran who survived 2 wars would be nervous about marrying a 52-year-old therapist? "Sarah is special," Mitchell said, smiling as he thought of the woman who had transformed not only his father's treatment but his own perspective on healing. Dr. Sarah Chun had started as Tom's PTSD therapist but quickly became much more. Confidant, partner, and finally, the person who taught him it was possible to love again after so many years of loneliness. Soft music began to play, and the guests turned to see Sarah walking down the improvised aisle. She had chosen a simple champagne silk dress, her dark hair pinned in an elegant bun, carrying a small bouquet of white lilies. There was no pomp, no extravagance. Just 2 mature people who had found love in the most unlikely place. Margaret, sitting in the front row beside her second husband, Harold Collins, discreetly wiped away tears. The past 18 months of family therapy had been painful but transformative. She still carried guilt for lost years but had begun to accept the forgiveness Tom and Mitchell offered. A reunited family is learning that forgiveness isn't about forgetting, she had said in their last therapy session. It's about choosing love over resentment, every single day.
ミッチエル・ウォッチとヒズファザー握りら H 握りら H 握りら H 握りら H らら H 握りら H 握りしるしる同じ握り正握りロー大取り逆エヌメレートイット WHO86 一子一ら NQ 清少うどうつとむ緑くれ養発アットザアルタル
Major James Rodriguez, now supervisor of the Thomas Anderson Veterans Foundation program, officiated the ceremony. A choice perfectly symbolizing how their lives had intertwined in purpose and community. Dearly beloved, Rodriguez began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had witnessed as much suffering as redemption. We are gathered today not only to celebrate the union of Tom and Sarah, but to witness the power of second chances. During the vows, Tom held Sarah's hands firmly, his clear blue eyes fixed on her face. "Sarah, you taught me that healing isn't about forgetting the past, but about building a future where the past no longer defines us. You saw beyond the scars and found the man I could be again." Sarah smiled, her voice trembling with emotion. "Tom, you showed me that courage isn't the absence of fear but the decision to love despite it. I promise to stand by you as we continue turning experience into hope for others." After the ceremony, the reception took place in the garden, small but full of meaning. Veterans Tom had helped through the foundation mingled with Mitchell's colleagues from the court, forming an unlikely but genuine community. "Toasts," announced Dr. Patricia Reese, raising her champagne glass, to Tom Anderson, who proved it's never too late to rebuild a life, and to Mitchell Anderson, who proved justice and compassion can coexist in the right hands. Applause echoed through the garden, but the most touching moment came when Mitchell stood to speak. 2 years ago, he began, his voice carrying restrained emotion. "I was a judge who believed my role was to punish. Today, I am a son who has learned our role is to heal." He looked at Tom, then at Sarah. "Dad, you didn't just change my life. You changed how I see justice, family, and second chances. Sarah, thank you for giving me my father back, whole." The months that followed brought development after development. The Los Angeles Veterans Court model was adopted in 17 states, with delegations regularly visiting to observe Mitchell's procedures. The Missing Veterans Accountability Act, propelled by Tom's powerful testimony before a Senate subcommittee, passed unanimously. Mr. Anderson, Senator Patricia Martinez said after his testimony, "Your story highlights not only failures in our systems but our capacity to fix them. Your son created a restorative justice model that's transforming lives nationwide." The Thomas Anderson Foundation grew from a small operation into a national network, with Tom traveling to train teams in other cities. His office at the Foundation's downtown Los Angeles headquarters was decorated with photos of veterans' families reunited, tangible proof that second chances could multiply exponentially. "Every family we help," Tom told a Los Angeles Times reporter, "represents years of unnecessary pain others no longer have to endure. We can't give back lost time, but we can prevent future losses." A year and a half after Tom and Sarah's wedding, Mitchell received a call that would change everything again. "Bobby," Sarah's voice was full of nervous excitement. "Can you come home? Tom has a surprise for you." Mitchell found his father in the nursery they had converted from the old guest office. Tom was holding a baby boy, with fine blonde hair and curious blue eyes identical to Mitchell's when he was a child. "Bobby," Tom said softly, "meet your son, David Thomas Anderson." Mitchell stood stunned. He and Elena Morales, a defense attorney he had met through veterans court work, had married the previous year. Thanks to therapy and his father's example of healing, Mitchell had finally learned to open his heart. David, now 3 months old, represented not only new life but new hope for their lineage. "He has your eyes," Sarah noted, stepping closer to see the grandson. "And the stubborn Anderson knows." Mitchell held his son with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the continuity the child represented. "Hey there, little guy," he whispered. "You have a very special grandpa with lots of stories to tell." 2 years later, on a golden spring Saturday, 3 generations of Anderson men gathered in the mansion's garden. Tom, now 68 but looking younger than when Mitchell first found him, sat on the lawn with David, now a curious 3-year-old bursting with energy. "Grandpa Tom, tell me about the soldiers," David asked as he did every afternoon. Tom smiled, understanding the echo of a previous generation. "Well, little soldier, let me tell you about soldiers who learned that being brave means helping others heal." Mitchell watched from the porch, Elena beside him. She was pregnant again. A girl this time, planned to be named Hope. The irony of the name was not lost on any of them. Their entire family had been built on hope, recovering against impossible odds. "Was Grandpa in the army?" David asked, settling into Tom's lap. "Yes, little one. Grandpa served his country and learned that sometimes soldiers get hurt in ways no one can see. But you know what I found out?" "What?" "I found that family love can heal even the deepest wounds," Tom said. His words meant as much for David as for Mitchell, who could hear every word from the porch. David processed this with the seriousness 3-year-olds reserve for important information. "Grandpa, were you hurt when you met Dad?" "Very hurt, little soldier. But your dad helped me get better. And now we help other parents and kids get better, too." "Like superheroes?" Tom laughed, a sound that had become more frequent and genuine over the years. "Exactly like superheroes. But our superpower is love, not strength." Mitchell came down the porch steps, joining father and son on the grass. The late afternoon light filtered through oak trees, casting golden patterns that made the scene feel almost too perfect to be true. "David, do you want Dad to show you how Grandpa Tom taught me to play baseball?" Mitchell offered. "Yes," David shouted, jumping up and running to Mitchell. Tom watched as father and son practiced simple throws, his heart full of gratitude that sometimes overwhelms people who survive what no one should survive. This scene, 3 generations playing together in a garden representing decades of hard work and second chances, was something he had dreamed of during the darkest nights sleeping on park benches. "Mitchell," Tom called out, "remember when you were David's age and I promised to teach you to drive when you turned 16? Mitchell paused mid-throw, smiling at the memory. "I said you'd be too old by the time I got my license." "And you were right," Tom said. "But look at the beautiful family you built while waiting." Elena joined them on the lawn, her hand resting on her growing belly. "David, do you want to feel your baby sister kicking?" As David pressed his small hand to Elena's stomach, excitedly commenting on every movement, Tom and Mitchell sat on the garden bench that had become their favorite spot for important conversations. "Are you proud of the work we're doing?" Mitchell asked. This question had become a ritual between them. Mitchell still occasionally needed reassurance that his father approved of the choices he'd made during their years apart. "Bobby, yesterday I got a letter from a family in Portland," Tom said. "A Marine had been listed as dead for 15 years. Our foundation helped reunite him with his wife and 2 kids who thought he died in Afghanistan. 3 children got their father back because of the work you started here." Mitchell nodded but looked thoughtful. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't seen you that day in court. If I just sentenced you and moved on like always." "But you didn't," Tom said firmly. "You chose to see me. You chose to listen. You chose love over precedent." "I almost didn't," Mitchell admitted. "I almost sent you away." Tom looked at his son, seeing both the powerful judge who commanded respect across California and the little boy who used to run to the door when he heard his father's car. "Bobby, do you want to know what I learned during all those years when I didn't remember who I was? Tell me." "I learned that love doesn't disappear, even when memory does. During the worst times, when I couldn't remember my name or where I came from, I dreamed about a little blonde boy calling me, 'Daddy.' I never stopped loving you, even when I didn't remember you." Mitchell felt tears threatening to fall, as they still did whenever his father shared memories from those lost years. "You really dreamed about me? Every night. And somehow that love called me back to you. It brought me to that park across from the courthouse exactly when you needed to see me." David ran up to them, interrupting the emotional moment with the perfect timing children naturally have. "Grandpa Tom, Mama Elena says baby sister will need stories too." "That's right, little soldier," Tom said, lifting David onto his lap. "And by the time she's old enough for stories, we'll have even more happy endings to share." As afternoon faded into evening, the family gathered for dinner on the patio. Margaret arrived with Harold, carrying flowers from her garden, a gesture that had become her way of contributing to family gatherings without overstepping the still healing boundaries. Sarah brought homemade rolls, a tradition from her Chinese grandmother she had begun sharing with her new family. During dinner, conversation flowed between generations and cultures, weaving a rich tapestry of stories, plans, and hopes. David held court at his small table beside the adults, regaling everyone with his 3-year-old observations about everything from bugs to airplanes. "Mitchell," Margaret said during dessert, "I saw that article in the Washington Post about your court model being adopted in 23 states. Your father would be so proud." The comment caused a moment of confusion until everyone realized she meant Tom's own father, David's great-grandfather, a man who had died when Tom was in Vietnam the first time. "He would be proud of all of us," Tom said gently. "We broke the cycle, Maggie. We turned pain into purpose." After dinner, while the adults cleaned up, Tom took David for a final walk around the garden. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the first stars began appearing in the darkening Los Angeles sky. "Grandpa Tom," David said, slipping his small hand into Tom's larger one, "are you happy now?" Tom stopped walking, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. Yes, little soldier. I'm very happy now. Were you sad before? Very sad. Sadder than you can imagine. But the important thing is that sadness didn't last forever. David nodded gravely, processing this. Mama Elena says when I'm sad, it's okay to cry. Your mama is very smart. It's okay to cry. But it's also important to remember that joy comes after sorrow, if we're patient and don't give up. They reached the fountain at the center of the garden, where goldfish swam in lazy circles through the clear water. David loved watching the fish, often making up stories about where they'd swim if the fountain was connected to the ocean. David, Tom said, sitting on the fountain's edge and pulling the little boy up beside him, I want to teach you something very important. What, Grandpa? Tom looked back toward the house, where warm light spilled from windows and he could see the silhouettes of Mitchell, Elena, Sarah, and Margaret moving around, cleaning up after another family dinner. Never let fear stop you from loving, little soldier. What does that mean? It means sometimes the people we love go away, and that makes us scared to love others. But love is the only thing that makes life worth living. So even when you're scared, the most important thing is to keep loving. David nodded seriously, though Tom wasn't sure how much the 3-year-old truly understood. But seeds were being planted, foundations laid for a life built on courage rather than fear. I love you, Grandpa Tom, David said simply. I love you too, little soldier, more than all the stars in the sky. Mitchell appeared at the garden gate, backlit by porch lights. David, bath time. Just 5 more minutes? David called back, giving his grandfather that look children everywhere use when trying to delay bedtime. Go on, Tom said gently. Grandpa will be here tomorrow for more stories. As David ran toward the house, Tom stayed by the fountain, overwhelmed by gratitude for the life he hadn't dared to dream was possible. 3 years ago, he had been sleeping on park benches, lost in a fog of trauma and abandonment. Tonight, he was surrounded by a family that loved him, meaningful work that helped others heal, and a legacy of hope that would live on.
Helped others reclaim their dignity, and a future that no longer haunted him, but embraced him. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. These other stories will also move you. Click to keep watching.